All right, welcome back to John Howard Week. We are here for day two. Hopefully you had a chance to tune in and listen to yesterday's episode. If not, it is there on our YouTube channel, John Howard Society of PEI. So you're welcome to go back there at any time and check that out. We're here, as I said, it's Tuesday, March 5th. It's around 12 p.m. We are here together. So today we will be bringing in our another guest. Just a reminder that, like I said, you can find us on the YouTube channel, or you can also find the comment section at the bottom there if you want to put any comments in live while we're recording. That's also an option. Okay, so our guest today is Jacinta from the Community Outreach Center. Jacinta, welcome in and thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me. My name is Jacinta Brown, and I am the program manager of the Community Outreach Center in Charlottetown.
Awesome. And we are fortunate to spend plenty of time together between all the committees and training and things that we do together. We were just chatting at the beginning here before we jumped on about how we'll be seeing each other later this afternoon for another meeting. So,
absolutely. Part of our work together, Josh, all the collaborations that we have together, from case conferencing with regular community organizations to the by names list, which is a bit bigger, and then the training, we've built quite a relationship over the past year and a bit.
For sure. One that I'm glad that we've developed. So let's you touched on that word collaboration. When Allie finished her time with us yesterday, she ended on saying sort of tips or recommendations for the future. And one of them was this idea of working together. And so I think that that's a key component of this work. But let's chat a minute for sort of what collaboration means to you, or what you envision that like, or how you see that sort of playing out.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to look at it through the lens in which we're doing it here and within each of our organizations. What we're looking at is multiple different organizations that are providing services to a similar population of individuals. And we need to be able to come together to streamline those services and ensure that people are receiving similar or adequate care from each of our respective organizations, but also be sure that we have the ability to work together to make that the best service that we can give. We don't want one individual to receive services from an organization and miss out on everything that all of the other really valuable organizations have to offer. So as kind of a community, we have made the decision to work together from each of our respective places of knowledge and experience and service delivery to further build up our clients, our participants, and hope that that gives them the best opportunity at success moving forward.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think there's a few key things that you hit on there that I think are worth sort of chatting about a little more. You talked about sort of this idea of consistency. So sort of whether you go to organization A or organization B, there's this opportunity to receive that same quality of services. And so that sort of alludes to this idea of having like a standard. And so when we start to think about that in terms of how do we get this consistency and develop a standard, what kind of things do you think either we've already done or could do or are helpful sort of in general when we work towards setting a standard and developing consistency?
I think I touched on very, very briefly, just said the words, case conferencing at the beginning. And I think that is a big component in developing that consistency amongst all of the service providers. It gives everybody the opportunity to come together and share in their strategies and solutions, and maybe impart knowledge on newer people in the field, or even people who've been here and actively working a case for a really long time, that they've hit almost a brick wall. They've tried many interventions, but maybe somebody else holds the knowledge or a tool or even just a different concept on how we can support someone. Coming together and sharing that information, sharing that knowledge, working as a unit versus multiple separate entities really creates a cohesiveness that helps us move people forward faster In order for us to be able to do that effectively, we need to all be at the same starting point. One of the ways that us as a community of organizations in Charlottetown and even broader in Prince Edward Island are trying to reach that goal is by creating consistent training among all of the organizations that are providing services to this same population. It's important to know we don't all provide the same service to individuals, but they're all services that complement the same clientele, the same person accessing those resources. And we want to come to that from the same place, from the same starting point.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's an important sort of differentiation you touched on, is this idea that we don't have to offer the same services. It's okay to go to one spot and get help for something around a complexity such as substance use, and somewhere else to get help with mental health, and somewhere else for housing, and you can go to different places. But if everybody, like you said, is sort of coming at it from the same place with the same lens and a similar perspective of how we best move forward, that there can be that consistency, and that communication, I guess, is kind of the other thing that comes to mind that you've sort of touched on. And you touched about sort of a case conference, which is I would say a more formal way of kind of encouraging that communication. I guess that would be another thought around, how can we bring together and encourage communication amongst the different organizations, knowing that, it's easy to kind of lose track of things and get tunnel vision on what's going on in your own world or your organization's own world.
I think it's really important to look at identifying key roles and responsibilities with regards to the various tasks and plans and goals that individuals have set for themselves or have set in collaboration with their caseworkers, their support workers. If we look at any case plan for somebody that we're working with, they may have somewhere between 3 to 5 key items that they want to work on, with a series of micro goals attached to that as well. It doesn't necessarily make sense for one individual to be working on attaining all of those things, because we can't be all things to all people at all times. So it really comes down to having individuals who buy into the process of working with each other and bringing together what I commonly refer to at the Community Outreach Center and with my own case management team that I manage there is a case team. Looking at it through the lens of we're only one of the people involved in that case team, and we need to pull together all of the individuals that surround and provide that true wraparound support service to the client or participant, and not hold all of those various components in our own hands. The collaboration is made to run a lot more smoothly whenever we do things like case conferencing. And that can take on different forms of its own. We can have individual case conferences based on one participant and bring all of those people to the table, or we can go bigger and more consistent and have all of those people at the table to work on a few cases at a time, which is one of the directions we've really moved here in Charlottetown and broader in PEI through both the case conferencing specifically related to clients of the Community Outreach Center, but also the by names list. And that's more, national services that we're using here in PEI as well.
Yeah. And I like that you sort of touched on the idea of being part of the larger picture. I think that it's easy to get caught up in sort of your own worldview of, coming at it from your role, your agency, your kind of type of work or scope of practice. And so I like that you kind of went down that road of we're part of that. We're one piece. And I think it can be challenging in some ways for folks to sort of let go some of that control and say, okay, I'm not going to help that one person with all of those things. At the same time, I think it can be freeing and sort of relieve some of that burden of I have to be all things to all folks. And so I like that you've gone down that road and talked about that, because I think that's a spot that people can get to if they're willing to buy into that process of I'll be one piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. And it's an approach that needs to be done intentionally. I think our natural instinct is to preserve and hold things close, and it's second nature or second instinct to then share that with others. It really does need to be intentional and mindful to build those relationships and become somebody that the other organizations are then willing to reach out to and to work with. Mm-hmm. And at the Community Outreach Center, that has been a priority from the moment we took over delivering services there almost 2 years ago now, that we would be somebody that others wanted to work with and were willing to work with.
Right. Yeah. And I think you touched on that idea there of sort of establishing trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's I think a key component of that is if I'm going to, hand over this person that I've been spending time with and include you as part of that plan, for folks, that can be part of that process is, do I feel confident that the person that I'm involving in this plan is going to, sort of the basic things, right? Like do what they say they're going to do, call this client when they say they're going to call them, communicate with me. And so I think part of that is just sort of like you've introduced, getting to know one another, getting to trust one another, getting some familiarity with how do we become reputable. And I think you've you collectively as the COC have done a good job of being a hub for that, mm-hmm. of, let's welcome some folks in. You've got service providers from other organizations on site on a pretty consistent basis. Maybe talk a little bit about that, about how sort of you've tried to be a hub for service providers coming together and made that an opportunity for people?
Absolutely. So we've always viewed our service delivery as a combination of services from many different places. Our own internal services have naturally grown as the number of individuals accessing those services has grown. But we always are still looking to our partnering organizations to either come in and support with meeting folks where they're at the Community Outreach Center, or providing services in other ways. Specifically, we have case managers from other organizations involved in service delivery with Community Outreach Center clients. Blooming House would be a great example. New Roots, John Howard Society itself, Bedford McDonald House. We have folks coming through the door all the time that are there to meet with individuals that they are working with. And we do our very best to provide them with a space that they can meet with that person, to ensure that the person knows they're coming, so that they're not showing up for a meeting that's not going to be attended. We want to be able to support people to work with the individuals that are supporting them from wherever that comes from. That doesn't need to be the Community Outreach Center. We want to support our partnering organizations, but also the client's preference and longevity in their case planning.
Right. And I think that's a great approach, because so many of the folks that we are trying to support are so transient in the nature of their day-to-day living, that it can be really difficult to find them, to connect with them, to support them. And so if there is a spot that they're going to on any sort of consistency, whether that be a couple times a week, or even if fortunately every day, then there is that opportunity to say, hey, look, so-and-so's already coming to this location. How can we set aside some suitable space or create an opportunity for people to connect with them while they're already a part of that space?
Definitely. And I think a big piece of it has become over time in growing that trust and working with others, really learning where you and your team and your organization excel at service delivery. What are you doing really well? And being honest with yourself, your organization, and the people that you're serving on what it maybe necessarily is not your niche. Right. And looking at those who you have to work with you, and what do they excel at? What is their niche? And building partnerships in a way that build on our strengths. And instead of really focusing on the weaknesses, we can use multiple different organizations to build a very strong team, versus using one or two organizations that are only going to build a mediocre team. We can look at who's best poised to deliver mental health support services, housing support services, financial support services, and bring them all together, versus trying to hold all of those components in one team's hand, in one organization's hands.
Yeah, I think that's a great description. And it really does further elaborate on that idea of it's really hard, bordering on impossible for one agency to do everything. And if they could, like you sort of touched on, they probably can't do it all well. There are going to be a number of different aspects of this work that they are better at than others, or are better at relative to the things that they do themselves. And so I like that thinking of strengths and looking at, as the community, if we all put our best foot forward in terms of here's what I can do, and we get the best of the best, then we do create sort of like a super team, if you will.
Absolutely. That's the goal.
Yeah. And so I think you've touched on a couple of ways in which we've moved towards that super team, if you will. You've talked about the case conferencing, where, we meet biweekly and we touch on different folks that individuals might be struggling to support or might want to revisit as a team to get sort of perspectives from other people. You talked a bit about the by name list. So just to sort of elaborate on that, that process involves multiple different agencies and organizations getting together as part of trying to best match and support individuals in the community that are trying to get matched to programs and services. Anything you want to kind of add to either of those two examples of collaboration, or any other kind of meetings, committees, things that are going on that you want to touch on in terms of collaboration?
I think with regards to the by names list, I'd love to touch on how successful it is. When we look at many of the other collaborations that are happening, not many of them have managed to bridge the gap of government and NGO organizations coming together to collaborate. It's a hard bridge to gap, and it's a hard table to pull everybody together from, whether it's volunteer organizations, NGOs, governmental organizations, and then even bigger, looking at things like justice and health. Being able to have representatives from many different jurisdictions and areas of service delivery within our province come together with the sole unified goal of supporting individuals to a place of being stably housed, being successful in their goals, whatever their life journey may look like, helping them lead a meaningful life, is not an easy task to accomplish. And yet we're getting closer and closer. We have more of those people at the table, and probably more so than could be said for many other similar types of tables or things that are trying to be brought together right now. It really does speak volumes to the dedication and the buy-in of not only the NGOs and organizations that are poised to serve this population of individuals, but to the province's ability to recognize this as a forefront issue that we need to be addressing right now, and putting everybody who needs to be there together working on this. It's also really helping us to ensure that nobody's getting missed.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really important piece to highlight, that we do have collaboration. We've seen an increase in attendance. We've seen an increase in terms of the diversity of who's attending those meetings. And I do feel like we've made a lot of progress in terms of the intentionality and effectiveness of those meetings. And we are, as you sort of alluded to, working and getting closer to this goal of having a solid process that helps people get matched in a way that they can be successful, and we can reduce the overall homelessness in our community, which is the sort of the founding reason why we pull those things together. I'm happy to hear that from your perspective as well. You feel like that's going well, and can be an example of something that we model some of the other tables and collaborations from. Anything else around those sort of conferences or tables or committees, or any other examples that you think you'd like to share?
This is more anecdotal, but I think it's so worth sharing. And because so much of the work that we do is hard and requires so much of our energy, and so often are we really focused on the challenging cases and getting stuck in those challenging cases, that one of my favorite moments every week whenever this happens is when we come to that BNL call and somebody's name is brought forward and people at the table are able to speak to how well that individual is doing and everything that they are currently succeeding in and all of the reasons that they should be the next person that get this housing unit or that get access to this or to that. And we can look at some of these cases and see how far they've really come and know that it's been the support of all of the people sitting at that table that brought them there. And I don't think we give those moments enough credit. So I think that one was definitely worth mentioning. Nice. With regards to other case conferencing, it's been a process and evolution for a long time. It's changed so much over the past 2 years, everything from attendance to how we document, where we meet. The whole process has been revamped and I believe revitalized to better support the individuals we want to support. We came from a place of really just looking at, presenting a case and it didn't go any further to a much more structured next steps, really logistical case planning, determination of how we help people be successful and taking the responsibility for those cases. We've transitioned from a place of nobody really owning a next step or an action item to those action items being so clearly defined that people are moving forward much, much quicker. As a community, I believe every organization has stepped up and answered that call to be responsible for these outcomes. And it's just the beginning at this point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point around the accountability piece that people have bought in and been willing to take that on. And I think you also touched on sort of an aspect of the approach that you and I certainly both share. And then I think we've seen a lot of other people jump into, which is sort of this idea of intentionality. Mm-hmm. And adding that piece to it to say, why are we here and what are we hoping to accomplish and how can we make sure that we're doing what we intended to do versus just sitting around having a chat, which is great, but that's not the time for it, right?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. I think we've done a pretty good job of sort of breaking down collaboration and highlighting some of the examples. We touched a bit on where do we go from here. Any sort of final thoughts on that piece of next steps, if you will, to sort of quote your description, or where do we go from here before we move along to the other part of the conversation?
I think that there's always room for growth. And what we have seen is a lot of new collaboration among NGOs and government. One of the areas that we're even just starting to dip our toes in at the Community Outreach Center is collaborating with private businesses and areas that we wouldn't normally think to collaborate. We've been able to start building relationships with many different businesses and organizations through our meaningful daily activities. So we run activities for folks to give them something to do, to build up their morale, to build their confidence throughout the day. And some of the more meaningful and long-lasting partnerships we've created at this point, the list is actually quite endless, but some that for me, I actually just love to talk about are the legacy gardens. So we have a group of individuals seasonally who will go out and work at the legacy gardens. They help tend to the gardens and they look forward to having them out there. Oftentimes they're going twice a week. The historic Glen Allendale Farm. It was a group of participants from the Community Outreach Center who actually volunteered their time and helped to restore that historic property following Hurricane Fiona. Wow. We've had a partnership with Kinetic Fitness for over a year now. We have somebody come in and deliver fitness class to a lot of our folks who are at the Community Outreach Center. More recently, we're working with the Construction Association. So we have folks going out and working on building their construction skills, really hoping on increasing employability there. Working closely with Reach Foundation, a few people who've just gone into some programs with Reach, and that just continues to expand. From more of a different programming perspective, we've also had the opportunity to work with Holland College and then branch out to the public schools branch in getting people either their GED certification, but we've actually been fortunate enough to build a relationship with public schools that we've helped a few individuals get their actual grade 12 diploma. They were 1 or 2 credits short from having that graduation. And in working with our teacher that we have at the Community Outreach Center, they were able to earn those credits through their work with her. So instead of having just their GED, they now actually have that grade 12 diploma.
That's awesome.
The partnerships are getting bigger and more robust. We had our first 4 students from UPEI last year, also had a Bachelor of Social Work student from the University of Calgary, and about 4 other practicum students since. So I think seeing the ability to bring in students and develop programs around that and give them some truly meaningful learning opportunities, but also supervision, has been a really good collaboration for not only us, but the educational institutions in and around Prince Edward Island as well.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And it's so great to see just bridging some of those gaps. Sort of as we talked about off the top, it's just so hard for folks to navigate the services that exist and the system in general. And so being able to, even if it's not necessarily offered in-house, but you can get that process started in-house and someone will be there with you to walk you through that process and help bridge that connection. That's so valuable. And so many of those services are things that, you know, just on a day-to-day basis, anyone on the island would be happy to be a part of. So it's really awesome to hear. And I appreciate you sharing all of that.
Yeah, no problem.
The last piece that you sort of ended on was this sort of talking about students and how you can help them build their skills. And so I think that ties into sort of the next phase of our conversation around this idea of training. Mm-hmm. And you did sort of talk a bit about that off the top too of this piece when we talk about consistency. So when we think about training, there's certainly a wide variety of options and things that people could be involved in. But what do you feel like have been some of the focal points, some of the things that we have going on, some of the things that are most beneficial? Wherever you kind of want to go with that to sort of get things started.
It's a great question, and it's a big question. I know it's one that has been in discussion kind of in and amongst this group of service providers for quite some time, really looking at what is needed to appropriately and effectively deliver services to this unique population. I think, you know, some of the easy stakeholders that we can mention are nonviolent crisis intervention, assist, so suicide intervention skills training, trauma-informed care, and then the SPDAT, obviously, assessment training, Josh, that you and I do together. Things like motivational interviewing, cognitive behavioral therapy, those all go a really long way in supporting folks within this field, case management training if it's relevant. But the first few, I think, across many of the organizations are those strongholds that everybody needs to have a condition of employment to be able to effectively start doing their job.
Yeah. And I think you covered kind of a nice blend there of this idea that there's sort of these theoretical educational pieces, right? When you get into CBT, MI, I would say it's a bit of a blend of kind of practical and theoretical versus these sort of very hands-on practical when it comes to like the nonviolent crisis intervention training, the SPDAT training that's very much geared for one particular thing, the suicide assist. And so I think there is that wide variety needed, particularly depending on the types of positions that we have. You know, there are some folks who maybe don't engage in case management or case planning or won't be part of those case conferences. So they don't need as many of those sort of soft skills, as you will, versus other individuals who that's going to be more of what they're doing versus that day-to-day interaction. Any thoughts on kind of those pieces as we sort of try to assess that out and get some idea of what's helpful in the community?
I think it's important that everybody start from a place of understanding what leads to addiction and what leads to homelessness, what often leads to mental illness. So to be able to understand the precursors of the population that you're working with, even from a standpoint of it could be data collection, it could be a frontline boots on the ground street outreach worker. Yeah. Everybody holding a position that is working with this population should start from a place with a base knowledge of what contributes to this. And from there, we're going to be able to start looking at what can possibly be a solution. I think a key factor is that trauma-informed care piece. And then going a little bit further into, I know it's becoming a lot more widely disseminated in PEI now, the brain story certification, which really dives deeper than the trauma-informed care. The trauma-informed care is telling us how to work with folks who've experienced trauma. The brain story certification is going to tell us what happened to them when they experienced that trauma and really dive deep there. I think that background knowledge as a starting point for folks is really helpful regardless of the role, whether you are managing the folks on the front line or maybe in the back of house doing more of that input and information collection, because it all helps to inform policy. It all helps to inform our directions that we're going to go, programming, things like that. So regardless of where you're at, the relevance remains the same.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting way to look at it. And I like that, as soon as you sort of said understanding why, like the first thing that came to me was trauma, right? Mm-hmm. So you immediately went there, which is great. And I think that's, like you said, a great place to start, just to understand, even as you said, if you're someone who's just inputting the data or working with the funding or the policies, just to make sure that you have a sense of who are these people that we as an organization are working with, and how did they come to need the help that we are providing? I think that helps around compassion, around understanding, also helps around collaboration, when we can be asking questions in a different way. When you're looking at the data and you can be looking for certain things, you can be having those conversations from frontline staff to sort of more of the behind the scenes staff. It can help those conversations be a little more seamless too. So yeah, I think that's a really great point around having a base understanding sort of across the board for everybody.
I agree. And then I think where we start to kind of divide out and really look at those more special skills, those really tangible skills that individuals need, is when we start looking at the respective positions within an organization, whether you're front facing, things like that. That's going to iron out some of those more hands-on tools that you need to be able to use. But having a collective knowledge of the why we're here, showing up to work in the first place, is a great launching point.
Yeah, I think it takes that I'm here to do one aspect to I'm part of a larger team, which is sort of where we started at the beginning of this conversation of what is my role as part of the team that's working with this person. It's the same at your own organization. What is my role as part of the larger picture of supporting these individuals who are experiencing these things? Mm-hmm. I think it helps with that piece.
For sure.
So we touched on a couple of things. We touched on the SPDAT training, which for those who are not familiar is the Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool developed by ORCOS. That's a housing-based assessment. So it's very relevant to the work that we are doing, both the two of us as well as a community. So why don't we just spend a minute there on this idea of assessment? It doesn't have to be necessarily SPDAT focused, but I think that word gets kind of tossed around from time to time. And I think it's helpful to sort of unpack that of what is an assessment, what does that mean, why is that helpful versus sort of the other approaches or lack thereof that you could take.
It's a really great question, Josh, and a very big one. Right from the very get-go, I think we're going to use an assessment because there's a piece of information we want to learn. There's something we're looking for, and an assessment is a tool to get us to that end goal. There's a decision trying to be made. There's a placement trying to be figured out. In grander schemes, there's a diagnosis that we're trying to figure out if it belongs there. Assessments can help us in any one of those areas, specifically looking at the work that we're doing here, kind of boots on the ground in this homelessness serving sector. It's going to help us determine what's best for this person. It can help us differentiate between 10 options and maybe bring that down to 4. And within that 4, we can then look at what are the areas this individual really needs some support and what are the areas that maybe they don't, and then we've brought it down to 2. So it's really that information telling piece, and it removes all subjectivity out of it from the assessor's perspective. Obviously, it's going to leave in the participant's perspective, but it takes away my ability to make that decision based on my own life experiences or my own worldviews. It's a tool for me to use that's tangible and guides my decision making without those unwitting, unknown biases coming into play and then influencing my decisions further down the road.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of the key elements there. And I like your sort of walkthrough of going from 10 to 4 to 2 options, because I think that to me is one of the key components is somebody sort of shows up at your door, if you will, and has a need or an interest, and you don't really know where to go. And sometimes they'll talk about 10 or 15 different things because they've got so much going on in their lives and they're all intertwined, and to sort all that out, it's really difficult. And just through conversation, you can get lost in the weeds. You can not know where to go. You don't have a whole lot of direction or intentionality. So I think for me, that's like you touched on, that's where that assessment comes in to say, okay, give me a snapshot of where this person's at, of what's going on for them in the different areas of life as it pertains to the type of work that a organization or agency or sector is doing. And it builds also on, like you said, that piece of being objective and unbiased of, the assessments have no assessment is perfect per se, but as you said, it's a evidence-based tool that it's been well researched and well tested, and it's more likely to yield a consistent objective outcome than just somebody sort of making those decisions and making those solutions for people.
For sure. And whenever we look at things like the SPINAT, as you mentioned specifically, and we can then use that assessment to tie not only to a program, but very specific services based on the outcome of that assessment, it really becomes, in a perfect system where all of these services exist and are abundant, it's foolproof. Right. It's guiding you into how to best support the person at hand, from, a systems matching or a programs matching perspective, but also from a general overview of knowing how to just step back and humanize with the person in front of you and know how to work with them ongoing for the next however many of months, from a way that's going to resonate with them, that's going to work for you, and bringing some compassion back to the work.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point around, you can sort of say, we've done this assessment. It's given us some information. It's given a bit of an indication of what could be beneficial. And then you can sit down with that person and say, like, where do we go from here? What do you think is the best place to start? So it does pair well that sort of science type research piece, evidence tool, with that compassion, like you're talking about, of, what's most important to that person and where do they want to go?
Absolutely. And I think we've mentioned that you and I facilitate this training together a lot, Josh. But one of my favorite pieces that you throw in every time we actually facilitate this training together is really reminding the people who are becoming certified to use this assessment tool to start from a strengths-based approach, to look at the areas that the assessment has told us people are doing really, really well. They actually already have a lot of skills in this area. So we want to focus on that and congratulate that, because if we look at everything we've just discussed, they're more than likely coming from a place of trauma, and yet they still have had the ability to grow and develop these excellent skills in however many areas. Using that to then motivate them to work on the areas that are maybe a little bit more challenging is, I hope, the lens that everybody is coming to this work from.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. I think it's a great point when we think about assessments, is there is that, you touched about humanizing it, right? So it is a tool that could be delivered in a very cold clinical way, and then sort of approached the results in a very cold clinical way of, here are your results, here's who you are, versus like you said, coming at it from that strengths-based perspective of acknowledging that everybody's doing something, and they've learned some skills, they have some resiliency. Anybody who's able to get to the place of sitting down and completing an assessment with someone, that's an accomplishment in and of itself. And so I think that opportunity to praise and encourage people is a key component of that.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're starting to wind down our time here. We've talked a bit about the assessments. We've talked a bit about the training piece. Anything else as we think about sort of training and assessments and how we approach doing this work with folks that you want to highlight as we move towards the end of our chat?
I think it's just really important to note, and I think there's a lot of really good work already being done in this area, that it's not each man for themselves. It's everybody is coming together not only to join forces and work on cases and work with clients, but to learn alongside one another. Everyone every day is stepping into the arena and taking on new challenges, and an openness and willingness to learn and take on more and support a bigger population than we ever thought it probably would become. And I think that will continue to expand. We're seeing a lot more sticking around, I think, in people these days that are coming in to support. And I think that speaks volumes to the training they're receiving, the collaboration of everybody working together. Yeah, and I hope that continues going forward.
Yeah, me too. I think that's a great point around the dedication that we're seeing from our community sector as a whole. And we've undergone a lot of changes and transitions, as you talked about, Joe, in terms of case conferencing, in terms of some of the meetings we run, some of the processes we have, and then also the types of individuals we're seeing and the complexity of those individuals. So I think the fact that, as you sort of framed it, people are sticking around and are interested in being a part of that movement towards progress and towards change, I think is a testament to the dedication and the great folks that we have working alongside us.
I agree.
Okay, well, thanks for doing this. Before we call it a day here, anything you want to highlight from a COC perspective that you want to throw in there as we move towards the end of our time that you want to note before we call it a day?
I don't think so, Josh. I mean, nothing is, really jumping out at me right now. One of the biggest things maybe that I would mention is, as we kind of grow and develop and change, not only the Community Outreach Center, but all of the organizations, one of the areas that we've kind of identified as an area for growth is, yes, that coordination of services for participants and for clients, but also trying to offer and extend that hand to the partnering organizations. So in the coming future, between multiple community collaborations, Josh, you and myself will continue to provide the SPDAC training to the community. Myself and a CMHA employee will be providing assist training to the community. And there's other partnerships that will be providing NBCI training. So we're really looking at not only working together to build up the participants, but we're now starting to branch out to look at how can we work together to build up each other in this work that we're doing.
That's a great point. And I think that's maybe a nuance that not everybody's aware of, is that a lot, if not most of the trainings that we're now offering are to the service providers as a whole, not like a specific organization or entity. And so if somebody changes positions or changes organizations, they still possess all of that training and all that knowledge and expertise. So we're not losing that when somebody leaves a spot or changes.
Exactly. It's a shared knowledge at this point.
Yeah, we're building up the community as a whole.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. As I said, we are day 2 today, so we will be back tomorrow for day 3 of John Howard Week. We'll be having Tessa Rogers from Peers Alliance come to talk about harm reduction. You can find everything you need to on our John Howard Society of PEI YouTube channel. You can also find information on our website or Facebook. Jacinta, thank you so much again for coming in, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, take care.